Very few spin-off shows have been able to achieve the level of recognition and respect that is equal to, let alone superior, to that of its predecessor. The only show I can really think of is Frasier, or at least a show that's done that well. I mean, you might think of others like NCIS and CSI, but you're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel there. Star Trek: The Next Generation was created by Gene Roddenberry, and it went on for 7 seasons, 178 episodes, from 1987 to 1994, making this the oldest TV show that I have ever reviewed on this channel. Now, a little background information on Trek. Star Trek first came out in 1966, which was also created by Gene Roddenberry, a notable television producer best known for doing westerns. The show went on for 3 seasons, only 3 seasons, due to what NBC considered low ratings. A lot of fans were angered by this, and when they aired the show in syndicated reruns, Paramount was able to earn a lot of revenue because they discovered that so many people are watching the reruns, even though the show was canceled, because the few, I should say, that did watch it really watched it. They didn't just watch it to pass the time. They watched it because they love Star Trek and they were interested in the universe that Star Trek puts you in. Basically, Star Trek was Firefly for its time. So Paramount decided to capitalize on this, especially when Star Wars came out in 1977, making space movies cool. So in 1979, they came out with a movie called Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which, in my opinion, is a good science fiction story, but it is really, really slow. I was trying to do the 2001 thing, but it just doesn't work with Star Trek. You gotta have good pacing. It would have to be a normal movie, not Kubrickian. That being said, they made another movie, which was Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. This time it had an actual villain, and the pacing was better, and many, many people generally consider this to be the best of the Star Trek films. It was followed up by Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, which, wasn't as good as 2, but it's an alright movie, and one of the best of the odd numbers, the cursed odd-numbered films that everyone says are bad. But I don't think it's that bad, and it's tolerable to me since it bridges the story gap between 2 and 4. Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, which continued the storyline, actually concluded the storyline that began with Star Trek II. Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is actually my favorite of the Star Trek films. I'd go on about why, but we're not talking about that right now. Point is, that was in 1986. By that time, Gene Roddenberry decided it was time to bring Trek back to television. However, he didn't want to put it on a network. This is before cable became mainstream. Cable existed, but not many people had it. So really, there were 3 networks. 4, I guess, if you included PBS, but that's a very special circumstances. There's really only 3 networks during that time that brought about original television content in the United States: ABC, CBS, and NBC. And then by 1987, that's when Fox came out, but he didn't want to deal with a network that had to cater to mainstream audiences and therefore had a tendency to make misguided corporate decisions on what to do with the shows, telling the creative forces behind the shows what to do with them when sometimes they really had no idea what they were doing. That happened a lot during the original Star Trek. It was why Trek got canceled, and he didn't want to deal with that anymore. Thankfully, there was another option, and the option was called first-run syndication. What Paramount did was they took Star Trek: The Next Generation and sold it to independent affiliate networks all across the nation. Not like one big network that catered to the entire nation, but little local networks. Like, for example, here where I live in LA County, they sold the show to KCOP Channel 13, which nowadays is called My Network 13, but it was an independent channel back in the day. And so they just aired Star Trek: The Next Generation as original programming. And it worked, because with the ratings completely decentralized all across the nation, they didn't have a corporate voice to tell them what to do. Therefore, Gene Roddenberry, his fellow producers, and Paramount were allowed to have more creative freedom with the show, and the show became a huge rating success. I mean, it lasted for 7 seasons, and it's widely remembered to this day. They still air reruns on various TV channels. The premise? It's the same as the original show. It's about a spaceship from the future run by people who are exploring strange new worlds, seeking new life, new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before, the final frontier, yada yada yada. You've heard the spiel before. The twist this time was that it took place 75 years after the events of the original TV show, so it really was the future of Star Trek. Therefore, the uniforms were different. If red shirts didn't mean you automatically died unless you were Scotty. No, actually, red shirts meant you were an officer that got to tell people what to do. The captain wore a red shirt. The Enterprise was a lot bigger. It was a different Enterprise, of course, but it's a lot bigger, had a sleeker design, and it had a lot more cool technological tricks up its sleeve and a lot more features thanks to advancements in imagination, writing, and, of course, special visual effects. Done, credited to Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's company that he used for Star Wars. So next time a Star Wars fan tells you that Star Trek's effects are lame, just tell them, hey, we got it from you guys. Also in the future, there was a lot more status quo changes, like the Klingons and the Federation were now allies, which was very new. Also, the cast was bigger. See, in the original series, it was just the Kirk, Spock, and Bones show, with everyone else playing subordinate roles. Sulu was the pilot, Chekhov was just a happy Russian that was excited to do stuff, Uhura translated and just relayed information, contact information, that kind of stuff. Scotty was the guy in the engine room. The only characters that had any real depth to an extent, I mean, maybe Scotty, but really it was Kirk, Spock, and Bones. That's what the show was about. This show was more of an ensemble cast. I mean, Captain Picard was the main guy, but each character had their moment to shine. It was like each character had their own individual episodes centered on them. Let's go over the cast one by one. We have Captain Jean-Luc Picard, played by Patrick Stewart. Most of my fellow millennials will know him as Professor X from the X-Men movies, and while he was perfectly cast for this role, this was the TV show he was best known for. This was the role that made Patrick Stewart's career. And you know what? I might ruffle some feathers with a few Star Trek fans that are watching this. I actually like Picard better than Kirk. Yes, I said it, and here's why. Kirk was, first of all, an archetype of the 1960s. If you're going to have sort of an action-y oriented show, he's got to be in his 30s or maybe 40s. He's got to be a single dude, kind of a hotshot type personality. He's got to be on the prowl. Yes, we're talking ladies' man type stuff. Writing and television had evolved by then, so we were ready to not only have a non-American lead character, we had an older lead character. So Captain Picard is, well, his character's French, even though the actor is obviously British, not even bothering to do with a French accent. You just accept that he's French. He's also more mature. He's more reserved. You know, he doesn't have a prideful personality about himself or anything like that. He was the ultimate ideal of what a Starfleet captain should be. Someone who's diplomatic, someone who's intellectual, someone who's not so much in for the exploration thing as fun, but really interested in the substance of exploring space, exploring new life, and, well, yeah, all of that. In other words, Picard was the more mature captain of the two, which is why I like him better. There. I've said it. His second in command, his first officer, is Commander William T. Riker, played by Jonathan Frakes. Now, he is kind of more of the Kirk equivalent. Even though he's not the captain of the ship, his personality is more equatable to Kirk. Sorry. Because he is the young officer, sometimes a little cocky of his own, not too much to the point where it's annoying and loathsome, but you know, a little bit of that ladies' man, quite the charming personality, except he is put into a role that I think is more appropriate for that, which is the first in command, the first officer, because you get the idea that he will eventually make a great captain, but he is young and he's still moving up to his career. I mean, he eventually does become captain in the books, but you get the idea. He will become a great captain, and that is because he is working and learning under the very best. Next up, we have probably my ultimate favorite character of all of Star Trek, which is Lieutenant Commander Data, the Chief Operations Officer. Data is an android, and he looks at life from almost a childlike, innocent perspective. He also has a bit of a Pinocchio complex in that he wants to be as human, emulate human ideals, emotions, and traits as much as possible. He does have a bit of a drawback, though, in that he can't really identify with emotion. He doesn't emote in the same way that we do, and he knows this as well, and it's something he's always struggled with on the show, which makes him a very captivating character, because it's through Data that we ultimately learn more about ourselves as human beings. I always like that about shows when you have an outsider perspective in science fiction shows, like an alien, or in this case, an android, who has an outsider perspective on human relationships and human interaction and that kind of thing. We learn more about ourselves through this outsider, and that's why I love Data so much. He is just so adorable. Next, we have Geordi LaForge, a lieutenant commander, the engineering chief, played by LeVar Burton, you know, the guy from Reading Rainbow, if you ever watched that from a kid. I remember when I found out that he was also in Star Trek, I had so much more respect for him. So he is the Scotty equivalent in that he runs engineering. He does, even though he's like a chief of an engineering crew, usually he's the one that does all the repairs because, you know, he needs the screen time. But yeah, he knows everything about the technical specs of the ship inside out. There's a problem going on in the ship, just call Geordi. He's right on it. He is the Enterprise repairman. He also wears a visor because he was born blind, and the visor doesn't let him see like we do, but he sees different frequencies and stuff like that. He uses the visor to his advantage in his line of work, in that he could see various different things. It's that kind of visor, but he doesn't see like we do. That being said, you have to respect the actor for working his hardest to emote and show range in his role, even though his eyes are completely covered throughout the entire run of the show. Next, we have Dr. Beverly Crusher, the chief medical officer, chief of sick bay. She is the head doctor. She fixes your wounds. She is also a mother. So she has a mother complex, and she's sort of the portal to the idea that this Enterprise is actually a home for families. Like, that's one of the reasons why it's much bigger, is because that way officers don't have to leave their families behind back on Earth or whatever planet they're from. They can just bring their families with them on their many exploratory adventures. I mean, that's pretty dangerous, I suppose, since the Enterprise does get into a lot of dangerous situations, but that way the families can be together. And it shows with her son, played by Will Wheaton, Wesley. I understand why people didn't like him at first, because in the beginning of the series, he was just the kid on Star Trek, and Roddenberry created him with this idea that, oh, he is like me if I was younger, that kind of thing. But they didn't really figure out what to do with his character yet. He was just that kid that happened to be really smart and wanted to be in Starfleet and all that kind of stuff. And there's a couple episodes in which he does save the ship from certain doom or certain bad situations, and a lot of people call bullshit on that because you have this crew of God knows how many people of the Enterprise, and this one kid ends up saving all of their asses when they couldn't, even though they're more qualified. In the second season, they figure out a role for him. He's almost like an intern. They make him into an acting ensign, in which he does get to take part on the bridge under Captain Picard's supervision, and he's like the intern. He gets to learn the stuff, and he gets to take part in a lot of stuff that he probably wouldn't have otherwise if he was just some guy on Earth that applied to Starfleet Academy. And you get to see a bit of an arc as he goes on a journey of becoming a more experienced crew member, which eventually does land him into the Academy. You remember when I talked about all those red shirts getting killed off? Well, in the original Star Trek, those red shirts were security, and they were pretty much only there just to show that a situation really is serious and dangerous because somebody died. However, they switched the colors, and now security is wearing yellow, and security also has a structure, and leading that structure is, well, in all honesty, throughout the entire duration of the series, it's two people. The first one being Lieutenant Tasha Yar, played by Denise Crosby. However, she eventually left the show, which is too bad because that was kind of a progressive move. You make the person in charge of security, in charge of fighting the threats that threaten the ship from the inside, a woman. You know, that's probably a big deal in the 80s. But she decided to leave the show, so she was replaced by a crew member who was just a helmsman, but later given a much bigger role thanks to Lieutenant Yar leaving, which is Lieutenant Worf, played by Michael Dorn. Through Lieutenant Worf, we learn that the Federation and the Klingon Empire are no longer at odds with each other. In the original series, they were the equivalent of the United States and the Soviet Union. It was very much a Cold War. We hated each other, but we're not going to war yet. We just don't like each other spreading our influence throughout the Alpha Quadrant of the galaxy. By the 24th century, as opposed to the 23rd. By the 24th century, the Klingons and the Federation are allies, and it shows because one of the crew members of the Enterprise is Klingon. Worf is a very interesting character in that he's a very by-the-book Klingon. He is an expert on their honor code. He knows much about Klingon lore. He's kind of like someone who's immigrating to the United States, and that has to study for the citizenship test, study about facts of the United States, and learns more about the United States, and comes to appreciate the United States in more knowledgeable ways than we natural-born citizens couldn't because we were just born into it. And this shows in many of his encounters with other native-born Klingons. Now, the reason Worf has this outsider shtick going on is because throughout most of his life, he was raised by humans after a deadly attack on a Klingon colony. He was found by the Federation and raised by humans. However, he's always had a desire to come back to his roots, come back to Klingon culture, even though he is an officer at Starfleet. But that's because he also has a connection to the Federation where he was raised and brought up, and he was also brought up on Federation ideals. So that also comes in conflict. It's kind of like, where do your allegiances lie? And it shows really well in episodes where they encounter Klingons, and Worf always has to balance the allegiances to the Empire and to the Federation, to his heart as a warrior, and to his duty as a Starfleet officer. And finally, we have Miranda Sirtis as Counselor Deanna Troi. She's the ship's counselor, she is the ship's psychiatrist, she is part Betazoid and part human. Betazoids are telepaths, although since she's part human, she can only sense emotions, not exactly actual thoughts. This is a character that they couldn't really figure out what to do with at first. She was created, in all honesty, this is proven, this isn't some speculation, this is actually recorded history, that she was created just to be the eye candy of the show, the pretty woman on the show. In later episodes, they give her more to do, especially when she starts wearing the uniform. That's when they start giving her more stuff to do. She starts having more impact in the plot. She's not that pretty face in the cute outfit that happens to be on the bridge of the Enterprise. And it shows in many episodes that have her in the role. You realize she does have importance. A lot of fans don't necessarily like her as a character. I mean, they're correct in saying she's only there just to be pretty, but I think they overlook many of the more useful episodes and stories she's been in. I suppose one final mention, even though she wasn't really a main cast member, she just had a lot of special guest appearances, but that would be Whoopi Goldberg as Guinan, who is the bartender on 10 Forward. She is someone that people talk to. She is sort of an unofficial guidance counselor, and they even poke fun of that on the show, but Whoopi Goldberg wanted a part on the show because she loves Star Trek a lot. And she ended up winning one. And in this episode she's in, she is very good. And I think that's pretty much it for the cast. So, overall, what do I think of Star Trek The Next Generation? Well, as you see right here, I've been a Star Trek fan for a long time. I've been a Star Trek fan since I was a child. My parents tell me that when I was a baby, one time the Star Trek Voyager theme song came on, and I rolled over for the first time. And when you're a baby, when you roll over, that's like the first real physical achievement you can have before you start crawling or before you even start walking. I've loved Star Trek before I've even learned how to truly appreciate Star Trek. So naturally, I love Star Trek The Next Generation. I think it is probably... Well, I don't know. I flip back and forth on whether or not this show or Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek show. But if I were to recommend someone going into Star Trek for the first time, I would recommend this show. That comes off as a surprise to some people. A lot of people would say, oh, just watch the original series. I wouldn't do that just yet because many episodes in the original series come off really dated. A lot of the writing comes off dated and not as good. I always felt that the writing in Next Generation was superior. I would definitely not recommend you start your Star Trek viewing with the J.J. Abrams movies. I don't hate the movies. I don't have a grudge against them. I mean, I think the first one, the 2009 one, was really good. I thought the second one was a misfire. I'm not sure what to think of Star Trek Beyond, which is coming out next year. Point is, I always thought Star Trek works better in television. If you want to watch Star Trek, if you want to know what Star Trek truly is, don't watch the newer movies. Watch that after you watch Star Trek The Next Generation. I mean, you can watch the newer movies first if you want, but you're not getting the full package. It's like watching Star Wars starting with the prequels. You know, you're getting some of it, but you're not getting what really makes it what it is. And I think Star Trek The Next Generation does it really well. And the nice thing about Star Trek Next Generation, this wouldn't really work well for streaming, but you could start in wherever you want. This is a series that definitely works well in reruns. There are plots that sometimes carry over to later episodes that you might want to watch the previous episode to understand. However, you don't have to watch every single episode in sequential order. You could just jump right in at any random episode. Everything should be pretty much established for you, and you could just watch the story of the week, because that's what these episodes were. That's what this show was. It was very kind of an old-fashioned form of television storytelling. Each episode is its own individual story of the week. It doesn't follow a super arc like most shows do nowadays. It's a good jumping in point. If you see a rerun on TV, I definitely recommend you check it out. Hopefully it's a good one. Sometimes there's not that good ones. I mean, when you have story of the week type episodes and you have 178 episodes to produce over the course of 7 years, you're going to have some clunkers in there. But I think the good outweighs the bad. If you want to pass the time and you want to watch TV and you can't really think of what to watch, but you just want to watch something to pass the time, you don't want to get really into something, I'd recommend changing the channel to whatever has Star Trek The Next Generation. Or, if you have a Netflix account, they have all 7 seasons on there, and you can watch it from the beginning, which would be the easiest way to do it, or you can watch whatever episode you just randomly choose. I will have to warn you, this first season is probably the weakest. I don't like to say that, but the first season is definitely the weakest. I'd say probably over half the episodes aren't that great. There are some good ones in there. The pilot's good. Conspiracy is good, and a few others, but it's the season where you could tell that they haven't quite figured it out yet. Not everyone is 100% comfortable with the roles they're in, and you could tell that completely changes once you get to season 2, because season 2, that's when everyone's roles are defined, and where they fully figure out what to do with the show. But like I said, not all episodes are great, but most of them are. Star Trek The Next Generation is one of the most wonderful pieces of television in the history of television, and people would look past that and say, oh, it's just a show for nerds. I'd rather watch Game of Thrones because I like blood, boobs, and violence and stuff like that, and it's serialized and it's HBO, which means everything's better. And I mean, no disrespect to Game of Thrones, but that's not really a way you should judge your good television. Definitely check out Star Trek The Next Generation whenever you get a chance. If you love television, you should watch the show, because not only is it a good science fiction program, it's also really, really good television. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.